Welcome to the Valseth View.
Welcome to the Valseth View. Today, we're going to be talking about the Iron Gate and the BABA sourcing maze. So basically, we are going to be talking a little bit about what it means to buy American and to build American. So that's kind of our focus for today. Uh, Valseth Enterprises works mainly in the legal and compliance operations sector. So we're very familiar with the new idea of how come the government wants you to buy American, and then what are some of the pitfalls that you can accidentally fall into when we're talking about trying to say that your products have been bought or are made in America. So welcome back. I'm Carolyn, and these are not just suggestions anymore about buying and building American. This is actually an incentive that is being put forth by the federal government.
That's correct. Right now, that the requirement is that we use approximately 65% of Buy American products. And it's been pretty much that way for 30 years. We are now going to be required to hit the 75% threshold of where our company must use 75% of Buy American, Made American products. And I know we're going to get into this, but again, we're talking about compliance and we're talking about operations. And as usual, both of those roles have a huge impact on this particular requirement.
Okay. So we're going to look a little bit when we talk about the buy American, build American. We're going to look a little bit at the idea of the forensics of your supply chain. Because what this is there are several companies that have gotten themselves into a little bit of trouble when they haven't really thought through the entire process of what does it mean to certify that your product was both bought in America and built in America. So, for example, the fiber optics and the steel industry are very familiar with this particular problem because they've faced this issue before. So, for example, there's a BEAD program that came out, and it was $42 billion for you to create high-speed internet. And every contractor thought that they'd get a waiver to be able to use foreign cabling, foreign different materials in order to make it done. And what they found out was that that was definitely not the case.
That's true. And the thought behind that is number one, we as taxpayers are providing that money to the government. Therefore, it makes sense that we would want to make sure that our countrymen receive the bids and also the purchases are bought from them, as opposed to sending money overseas to people and to an economy that doesn't help out our economy.
Right. So the Department of Commerce with the fiber optics industry actually towed the line, and they said, no, we wrote this actual program to support local American glass companies. And so we want you to utilize the U.S. glass industry to move forward with the fiber optics here in the United States of America. So very important for people to understand that you're not going to get an automatic waiver, kind of like what we've had before. You're going to find that your agency that you're contracting with is probably going to keep it a little bit tighter, a little bit closer, and they're not going to be as willing to give you a waiver. Another example is Novum Structures case, and this is the second example of a company that thought that they maybe were buying American, and then they found out that because of the supply chain forensics, which is now available to agencies, they found out that they were not utilizing what they should be doing. So in that particular instance, they were using foreign steel, but they were saying, okay, but we melt and pour the steel here in the United States to be able to get a certificate to say, hey, that steel was purchased here within the United States.
And they got audited and they were fined for not being in compliance. And they were given a $3 million fine, and they were also debarred from being able to apply for any other federal contracts.
Yeah,
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, debarment is pretty much a death sentence to anyone working in government contracting because you can't bid on federal work for 3 years. So that can be a serious offense. So you really need to think hard about if you see that buy American, build American in that contract opportunity that you're responding to, think about all of the different parameters that kind of surround that. So let's do a little war rooming like we've done in previous episodes of what do
Okay.
you think we can do if we're talking to a vendor or we're talking to a management team about how they can make sure that they stay out of these particular traps.
You mentioned part of it earlier, and that is by knowing where your resources are coming from and knowing where you're purchasing from. Now there's documentation available from every company that provides things, knowing that you as a purchaser have to confirm that you have bought American, build American. And so they have this information for you whenever you buy from them. And that is something to make sure that you have so readily available. Don't make it where everybody can have it, but the people that need to know that you have that documentation. And then the other part of that is government is looking at what you purchased. What did the person that you contracted with, did they buy that
Raw material.
thank you, that raw material from an American country, or did they buy it from a foreign country? So it's not just you they're looking at. They're looking at you and the people that you contract with to make sure that everyone is buying American, built in America.
Right. And one of the things that you can do as a government contractor to kind of protect yourself is get STEP certifications. So, what does that mean? It means from the raw material itself all the way through when you've actually purchased the item, you have a certificate from each one of those companies showing that one, it originated in America, and then also that it was poured or built in America, and all the way to your doorstep where you're actually utilizing it within the contract. And I know we talked a little bit about things like cost. We've
Mhm.
talked about with clients cost and the idea that for them, I think that steel is about, it's like 20-30% more
Mhm.
than buying it from a foreign thing. But those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do is we're trying to support the US vendors. So even though it may be a little bit more expensive, it is the right thing to do. And you can factor all of that into your bid.
Mhm.
It's something that you can kind of take advantage of.
And one thing to think about is if you think that you can hide things or skip over a step, it's going to come back and get you. So just go ahead and do it right the first time, and you will build honesty and trust with your staff, build it with the federal government and with your contractors. Just do it right the first time.
And like I said, part of your strategy should be building in or baking into your bid itself the additional costs of being compliant with Buy American, Build American. Because if you put that into your bid, you're not going to bankrupt your company. You're going to actually kind of protect yourself to be in compliance. And it is something that you can point out to not only the government contracting portion of your business, but to other business owners as well. You can say, hey, the reason why we're a little bit higher is because we're actually supporting the Build American, Buy American program. And so therefore we may cost a little bit more, but it's staying within our country. So
Correct. And I just want to mention again, knowing my compliance background, do it right the first time because you don't want to go back and be debarred like Carolyn said earlier. It's 3 years of not being able to bid on federal contracts, and most companies can't survive that. So if you need any help with understanding what that means, if you need any help with setting up systems or operation policies and manuals and processes, feel free to reach out to us at valsethenterprises.com.
yep. And another thing that we want to talk about that I know is kind of at the forefront of a lot of the older government contracting folks is they say, "Well, I can just get a waiver."
Mhm.
And I think that that waiver, the non-availability waiver, is slowly moving away. It's going to be harder and harder for you to obtain that. So don't just count on the fact that you can get a waiver because there actually is a website now that's a public website that's called Made in America Office or MIAO. And it puts all your public waiver requests on a website so that people can see it. And what can end up happening is a supplier can see that you're looking for something and saying that you need a waiver because it doesn't exist in the United States. And they can immediately come back and say, no, it actually really does. And I build that or I produce that. And so it's a lot harder for you to be able to kind of go to your contracting officer and say, I have no idea what I can do or how I can get it. You're going to have to kind of justify that you've actually taken the time to look at what's available in the marketplace and then also to do that before you submit your bid and not after. A couple of like caveats that jump out to mind for me are a lot of times you will see that when they're doing your contract or your bid, you need to think about things that have kind of a variable cost. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that right now currently with things that are having fuel surcharges, which is a good example of I bid a price X. The market has changed in this particular fashion, and what can I do to not fall into bankruptcy? I think that everybody has to be aware of the fact that you can still reach out to your contracting officer. You can let them know that the pricing has changed. And lots of times, even within the bid itself, you can put something in there that allows you to negotiate price, especially if it's a flexible type
Mhm.
thing like fuel. I don't know if you thought of anything else that's similar to that, but those are the kinds of things that when we talk about previously, there could be a waiver and now there isn't. Another perfect example in the medical field was for a while, especially during the COVID times, there was a waiver that was being given for gloves because people said that the gloves were not being produced in America. The gloves were all being produced overseas. And what happened was, as a result of this type of initiative, at that time it wasn't buy American, build American. At that time it was necessity, necessity, necessity. There was no supply chain, so we had to do it. But I think that that's a good example of how industry can have a need and then also business can meet that need at the time. And so I think that I really like the idea of the website and
Mhm.
people being able to check that. So if you're a manufacturer, definitely take the time to go and take a look at the website because you want to be able to let other people know, hey, I'm here in the United States and I can do this. Another example is something that we've worked on before with the company, which is the semiconductors. That's
Mhm.
a good example of it as well. There were a lot of vehicles and other things that needed them, and they were being all produced overseas. There was an issue with it, the supply chain, and
Correct.
now we've seen a kind of a pivot to making sure that we don't have those kinds of things happen here in the United States.
Correct. A lot of companies have stepped up to build those items that had to be purchased out of country to where a lot of them are now built here. And so that's a perfect example of the Buy American, Built America.
Mhm. I don't know if you've noticed, but we're also getting a lot of requests for proposals and IDIQs, which are open, solicitations, where they talk about funding that is available for manufacturing here within the United States of America. So, especially for our manufacturing community, now is the time for you to start paying attention to
Yes.
the Build American, Buy American, because even if you haven't been able to produce something or there's been some kind of an impediment to your growth in production, now is the time to take advantage of this kind of initiative to make sure that what you're doing is actually supported and that you can get out there and sell the products to third parties.
I agree. That's very important. And it may also create an opportunity for subcontracting.
Yes, I agree. So we've kind of with today so far, we've talked a little bit about different things that deal with the Buy American, Build American sourcing. We've talked about some potential pitfalls for you as a vendor. We've talked about the fact that you need to make sure that you're getting your STEP certifications because I think that that's very important. It will make sure that you have actually documented the process from raw material all the way to manufactured product so that should you go into an audit or should anyone query you, you are able to produce the appropriate kind of evidence. And then we've also talked a little bit about the idea of not leaning so heavily on a waiver. I think that it's important for you to do your due diligence at the very beginning and find out is there an American company that actually can do and or produce these documents.
And just like in previous episodes when we've talked about um, compliance at the end stage, be sure that you have an audit trail for your raw materials and other items that you have purchased and that you're using for your solicitation, because if you don't have that, it could be perceived as fraud.
I'd like to add something else to what we've previously talked about, and we talked a little bit about the issue with Novum, Structures LLC, and they were required to enter a guilty plea, and they had to pay $3 million to resolve uh, s- a criminal and civil liability from the improper use of foreign materials. So. This particular use of foreign materials was in violation of the Buy American requirements, and so what happened in this particular case was Novum, who specializes in design and construction of glass space frames and that are often used in roofs and in atriums, they actually were utilizing materials that did not come directly from the United States. They were utilizing things that came from other countries and claiming that it was a domestic product. This is where a lot of people get into trouble because, like we mentioned before, they didn't get the STEP certification, so they weren't truly aware of what was going on in that whole process. But if you bring a one of the things that happens is if you don't have the correct information and if you're not buying American, you're going to be subject to the False Claims Act. And you're also going to be subject to this kind of Department of Justice prosecution. And you don't want to be using federal funds to purchase items that come either from a country that is not allowed to provide manufactured materials to the federal government, or you're alleging that you're using American products and you're not actually using the products themselves. So I think that when contractors are doing business with the federal government, and especially now that we have a lot more clarity given the data that is contained within all of our data systems, it is going to become more and more difficult to kind of fudge those things and say we were partially compliant. A lot of times, and we've had experience with this when we've worked with auditors, what they do is instead of asking you to provide them answers to questions about your supply chain or your supply line or your STEP certifications, they will request an auditor's access of your system. And what they can actually do is they can go in and they themselves can follow that kind of supply chain backwards into where I think that it's important that every company be aware of the fact that they're going to be not only looking at your documents, but they're going to be looking at the documents that you've obtained from your suppliers. And we'll try to take a look and find out if they're actually in compliance with the Build American, Buy American kind of idea. So I think that it's very important that when you're doing something like that, that you take that into consideration. The other thing that I want to kind of touch upon is if you are doing something like this, 9 times out of 10, you've got someone on the inside who could probably be a whistleblower. And the whistleblowers can be protected and can even receive portions of that civil settlement by becoming an actual whistleblower themselves. So they're kind of incentivizing people to step forward and say, my company is not in compliance with the Buy American, Build American, and here is why. So I think it's important for all of the vendors out there to think through that process and to ensure that they're doing a good job in what they're doing. Um, I also want to, before we kind of close out this whole topic, what are some of the things that Valseth Enterprises can offer to a company to help them through this Buy American, Build American process?
We can focus on the operation systems that a company has and review them and make sure that um, they meet all of the compliance regulations. And if they don't, we can offer different solutions that the company would choose, offer different solutions that would then make them compliant. And then, of course, my favorite, the training comes in, because if you just do all this on paper, that doesn't work. You have to have people who understand what the regulations are and how you have set them up. And so we can do the processes themselves. We can do the training with it. We can do the follow up. We can provide audits as frequently as a company would like. And then along those same lines, we would, of course, bring in legal to help with a large part of that. You want to talk about some of those things?
Yeah, I think that what we offer with the compliance and legal operations services is that we're giving you a blend of the two. So we've got someone who's working on compliance with you and telling you, hey, this is how you can be compliant. And then we have someone who's also in the mix from the legal perspective talking about, and this is why. Because a lot of times I think a lot of companies ask, why do I have to comply with that? What's the importance behind it? And we can kind of educate the executive staff and other members of the team as far as, why do you have to do this? What is the importance behind it? And how can you request those things? I think also we do a really good job of working with companies to help them to understand that step certification process, because I think that sometimes it can be confusing to your buying team. So what we can do is we can sit side by side with them and talk about, this is what a step certification looks like. This is what you have to obtain from your supplier so that you can then be ready to show that to anyone that comes in to do an audit. I think that practice internal audits basically kind of take away the power from the idea of having to use a whistleblower to get your company to come into compliance, because you're going to be encouraging your staff on the inside to say, hey, let's work through all of these processes that they're new to us, or we haven't really thought about them in this particular manner, and let's work through them. I know that a lot of companies, especially when they step into government contracting from the private industry, they're not used to a lot of these regulations. So like you mentioned, the training is very important because it helps your staff to kind of get up to speed, understand everything that's going on, and also at the same time be compliant. So I think that the mixture of those two things is very, very important. Um,
One of the things I would like to add, and we've talked about it a lot in other episodes, is making compliance a part of the daily conversation, not only with the executive management team, but also with the whole team that's working in your company, to talk about compliance issues, to really talk about how to report compliance issues. Don't be punitive when compliance issues are reported. Acknowledge them and solve them. And I think that's very important to remember at this point.
I agree. So thank you once again for joining us on the Valseth View. Please, if you have any questions or you want to reach out to us, please reach out to our website, www.valsethenterprises.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.